Hello, people of YouTube, and welcome to my channel. My name is Adrian. I'm a podcaster, retro game collector, artist, graphic designer. I've been podcasting now for just under 5 years, and thought it would be a good time to start making some videos talking about some things that I'm just really passionate about and into. So one of those things is, from what you can see behind me, I'm into video games and collecting in general with video games, figures. Those are the main things that I collect. But I really wanted to start a video series where I talk about collecting and my experience with it. So this first video is going to be pretty much primarily focused on how I started collecting. So to get things started here, I've been a collector for, since I was real young. Like I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and during that time, a lot of companies, I should say, were pushing collectibles. Like my earliest memories of collecting would be like the little California raisins that you would get, I think, at Hardee's.
Get your California raisins at Hardee's. Another way. We're out to win you over.
I don't remember where exactly, but I remember seeing the commercials, and I remember my mom would bring them home for me. And I had a few little of those little figurines, little plastic figurines, and they're playing instruments or riding a surfboard or a skateboard or something like that. And I just thought they were fun and cool to collect. I had no control over that collection, obviously, but it was nice that my mom would bring those home to myself and my siblings, and we could play with those and have a good time collecting them. So from there, I remember collecting things from cereal boxes, the little toys that you would get in those, or glasses. If you remember those from restaurants, like McDonald's would hand out glasses with prints on them and things like that. So collecting in general was really pushed heavily back then, I would say, for pop culture type items. That's really when I got into it. And I'd say the first real collection that I got into and would spend my own money on, whether it was birthday money or allowance money or anything like that, would be probably baseball cards. So my friends at that time were really big into collecting baseball cards, and I naturally got into the hobby as well. And even though I didn't watch a lot of sports, I would follow it close enough to where I would know who the players were, what teams they played for, what types of or what teams I was into. I was the St. Louis Cardinals was my team, and so I would set out to collect all the players for that team. I slowly moved into like football cards and basketball cards and things like that. And really started to grow a collection that I would trade with my friends. After that, I would say the thing that really sparked my collecting habits today would be when the Star Wars movies were re-released in the theaters in like the mid-90s.
For an entire generation, people have experienced Star Wars the only way it's been possible, on the TV screen. But if you've only seen it this way, you haven't seen it at all. Now, for its 20th anniversary, the adventure of a lifetime returns to the big screen in a way you've never seen before.
My mom took me to watch those movies, and I fell in love with them. Up to that point, I had never seen them, even though I knew about Star Wars. I probably saw bits and pieces of one of the movies on TV or something. I think I remember Return of the Jedi the most, but I never sat down and actually watched the movies in their entirety. So when they re-released the movies, I went and watched the original Star Wars and absolutely fell in love with it. One Easter, my mom got me a Star Wars figure, since they re-released those figures too. And mine was Luke Skywalker, and I want to say it was the Luke Skywalker where he's got the backpack to carry Yoda when he was in the swamp. And my brother got a Han Solo in his Hoth gear. That kind of sparked my interest in figures. I thought this little thing that was representative of a movie that I loved, of a character that I loved as well, like this was cool to me. So I set out to collect as many Star Wars figures as I possibly could. I was about, I don't know, 14 maybe. And I had a job working for my neighbor as a ranch hand. We lived in the country, so I got to help with mowing his yard and building fence, cutting down trees in his pastures and stuff like that. It was hard work, but I got paid well for it, especially as a 14-year-old. But I didn't have anything to spend my money on, so I started buying figures, Star Wars figures, like crazy. Anytime I got a new paycheck, I would go buy some more Star Wars figures, and it got to the point where a lot of those were getting clearanced out, so I was able to get more bang for my buck. I really accumulated a pretty massive collection of Star Wars figures, and I had my room decked out with posters and Star Wars figures up on shelves. Some of them I left carded, so I kept them in the box, and I would hang those up on the wall with little push pins. And I still have that collection today. Unfortunately, most of it is in the attic. I do have some of it up here in my room, but I had a really good time with that. And I moved into, from there, I started moving into other movies and video games that I was into at the time. So at the time, I was really big into PlayStation games like Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy and Resident Evil, things like that. So I would go and buy figures related to those games. I decided when I turned 16 that I wanted to work at Toys R Us, of all places, because where else can you buy figures and get them when they come out or when they get clearanced? I had first pick. So I started working at Toys R Us. Actually, I didn't get hired for the Toys R Us part, but I got hired for the Kids R Us part, which I think worked out pretty well in my favor all overall. I was a little disappointed with that because I really wanted to work on the toy side, but at the same time, I was just happy to be able to get a job there. I went there and I would spend my money on any figures that I would find. I don't remember specific figures that I bought, but I remember seeing a lot of things go on clearance, and I'd pick those up. But I was also right next door to the electronics section, and I was super into video games at that time as well. And I remember spending my breaks going and playing like the N64 and the PS1 kiosks that they would have set up for different games. And man, I remember watching some games just clearance out, like the Super Nintendo games. They would clearance those out at like $5, and if I could go back in time and buy those, I would. I missed out on a lot of them. I didn't have a Super Nintendo, so I didn't buy them. And I remember seeing some really good ones in there, like like your Final Fantasies, your Chrono Triggers, Earthbound, things like that. And those have shot up significantly since then. But so after going to college, I kind of switched my focus to other things, like getting through school and working on my art and trying to get better with that, because that's what I wanted to do for my career. But also, like, I started a family early on, got married, had my first kid when I was like 23, 24. So I started young and stayed out of the hobby for a good long while. And it wasn't until I'd say probably 2012 or 13 when I started getting back into collecting really heavily again. And that was with like video games. I'd always been a gamer. I'd always played a lot of games, but as far as like retro games go, I didn't play those much. I was more into the new stuff, the new hotness, and playing the new game. But then I started really getting interested in retro games, and I remember specifically like what led up to that. So my coworker at my job at the time, we were talking about video games, and he was talking about how he was into older games and how he liked to collect and stuff like that. And that to me just seemed like little bit of a foreign concept, even though I watched YouTube and I see all these people with game collections behind them and stuff. So I was used to seeing that, but I never really considered doing it myself until I started talking to him. And then I started understanding. It's like, there's a lot of games that I missed out on that I would love to go back and play again. And that would be kind of fun to go back and do it. But I was perfectly okay with emulation. Something clicked with me. It's like, I want to relive that experience of putting in the cartridge into the console and playing it again. Around that same time, I saw on my Facebook page an old high school friend of mine had a picture of his entire Super Nintendo collection out on his carpet. And it was just a bunch of games that he'd had in a box, and he pulled them out to start playing them. And I thought, man, that is cool. I want that. I want to do that. And I would say that's kind of where it started. I also was interested in making content or videos about retro games and talking about them at that time. Unfortunately, I never got around to doing that, and I can't believe it's now like almost 10 years later, and I'm finally doing it. But my goal was to acquire these games and be able to talk about them while having the physical object in my hand while talking about it. Anyway, I got started collecting video games right after that. I started going to places like Vintage Stock, where they sell old media, basically, like comic books, movies, video games, figures, basically all the things that I was into, records, albums. And I was drawn to that, and I started going there and looking for certain games to collect. At that time, I was really into just acquiring the games that I had missed out on. So I remember picking up like consoles like Super Nintendo, N64, things like that. I don't think I ever bought them at Vintage Stock. I'd only buy the games there. But I did have some old consoles for my personal collection. Like I had a GameCube and a PS2, things like that. So I didn't have to reacquire those. But I set focus on buying games that I either had or I was into as a kid but never got to play. So I would go there and look for those games, and I would pick them up. And at that time, the games really weren't that expensive. I don't think I ever paid more than maybe $20 for any one game. And even that I thought was a little bit steep for where I was wanting to spend at that time. Things were a lot different, even 10 years ago. I also was on Craigslist a lot. I would look for retro gaming lots, and I would, make an offer and go pick them up. I acquired a good chunk of my collection early on because of that. Once I started getting into collecting the games that I missed out on and nostalgia games, then I wanted to start putting a focus on the types of games that I wanted to collect. So I set like 3 ground rules for myself, for my collection, so I don't acquire a bunch of things that I'm not interested in. And for me, that was RPGs. I love RPGs. RPGs were the introduction to gaming for me on the PS1. I had a gaming systems in the past that I was really into and I loved, but I don't think I really got into gaming the way I am today if it wasn't for the PS1 and for specific RPGs like Wild Arms and Final Fantasy VII, things like that. So I set my sights on collecting every RPG that I could. Any system, I didn't really set any boundaries to that. If it's an RPG that I'm interested in, I'm going to acquire it. And I remember going through there, and at that time it still was the same as it is today, where RPGs are more expensive than everything else, but it was still somewhat feasible to be able to acquire those. I also set my sights on horror games, because Resident Evil was a hugely inspirational game to me as a gamer, young gamer. So I set out to purchase horror games, which are also very expensive. Were then too. I have expensive taste, I guess. But I also set my sights on first-party Nintendo games and Sega games. And what I mean by that, it's like the Marios, the Pokemons, the Zeldas, the Sonics, things like that. And I would go out and look for those. But I remember one specific lot that I think really kick-started my collection is one that I found on Craigslist. It was a a listing with one picture, and it was a very blurry picture of some games laid out on the table, a bunch of games like Super Nintendo games. And it said, and I could make out some of the games, but not all of them. And it was a lot. But I remember reading the listing, and it said Super Nintendo and Nintendo RPG or game lot, mostly RPGs is what it said, mostly RPGs. And it's like, ding, that's what I'm looking for. This is probably a lot that I need to grab. So I called the guy, and it was an old man, which was a little bit surprising to me. I wasn't expecting an older guy to be selling this stuff, but yeah, I contacted him, asked him to start reading off some of the games, and I remember he was reading them off, and he said like Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 2, Chrono Trigger. He just kept going down. Lufia. All of these were like ding, ding, ding. I gotta have it. He wanted like $450, I want to say, for the entire lot, which was a killer deal even then for the amount of games that he had. He also lived about an hour away from me, and I asked him if he could hold it for me until I got off of work. And he said, well, I have like 2 other guys that are coming after work, so it's a first come, first serve. And I was like, oh, man. So I was at work. I told my boss, I said, hey, look, I just had this deal come up. I have to go get it. It's like, this is a once in a lifetime type opportunity. She's like, yeah, sure. Go for it. Yeah. Totally cool about it. So I called up my wife to come pick me up, and we were down to one car at the time. Here I am spending $450 on some games, and we were down to one car. But so she came down and picked me up, and we drove the hour away to get there. And this house was in a trailer park in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere. It was a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to say sketchy, but I think anybody else might feel a little bit off-put by that. But growing up in the country, I had a lot of friends who lived in places like this, so I was comfortable with it. So anyway, we get there, and the guy comes out of his house, and he's like, hey, they're all in here if you want to come in and take a look. And I was like, oh, man. I said, Amy, she's sitting in the car. I said, if I don't come out in like 5 minutes, drive away, get figure something out. So anyway, I went into the house, and it was nothing. Like, he took me back to the room where the games were, where he took the picture. And from that moment on, I was absolutely hooked. I was looking through these games, and I was at a loss for words. Honestly, I couldn't believe everything that I was seeing there. It wasn't just Super Nintendo RPGs. It was NES RPGs. A lot of the major RPGs that he had. He also had a lot of first-party games like the Marios and the Donkey Kongs and Mario Kart, things like that. And he also had the systems. He had Game Boy games, RPGs. He had the Game Boy system. He had strategy guides for a lot of the games, including a lot of strategy guides for PS1 RPGs. And I asked him about that while we were there, and he said he got rid of those not too long before. So I missed out on that, but it didn't matter. I was super excited to get this lot. So we loaded it up. I came home. I went and started recording, opening the box and going through the games one by one, and I was just absolutely blown away.
Before you go, though, can you make that face again that you made when you were coming out? This is... As you're coming out. Okay.
This is the excitement that I get from collecting video games, okay? So.
I know. And I enjoy watching you do it.
And like I said, I was hooked. From that moment on, I was hooked. I would go to garage sales. I still do this today. I go to garage sales every Friday, Saturday morning. I used to find a lot more stuff back then than I do now, but I still do occasionally find the good deal that keeps my thrill of the hunt exciting, and I still go after it. So once that love of collecting hit me again, I just went full force on it. Like, started acquiring games that I wanted, and I would sell the ones that I don't want in order to have money to buy the ones that I did want. And it's blown up, and I'm fortunate enough that my family supports me and my wife supports me. I'm able to display my collection in this room. I don't think I would collect if I couldn't display it. That's a very important thing to me. Is like I feel in my element when I'm around this stuff, around my collection. It inspires me, and as an artist, I like to have inspiration through things like visually, and these things are all visually stimulating to me, and it helps me. It helps me a lot with being productive and being creative. But also it just makes me happy. You know what I mean? It just, having this stuff makes me happy. If this was all sitting in boxes in my garage, and it used to sit in boxes when I first started collecting, I didn't have anywhere to put it. And I had a massive collection that I was building up. And I remember just filling up boxes like, this is not doing me any good. I have to get this stuff out. And I turned our bedroom into, the collection. If you are familiar with the Jabcast that I used to do, you would see the backdrop. That was in our bedroom with the games, the same games I have here now, but that was in our bedroom with our bed and everything. And my wife was totally cool with it, and I appreciate the heck out of that. So, yeah, I think if I couldn't display these, I don't think I would be actively searching after them, and I would probably not try to collect them. That being said, I do have a lot of stuff out in my garage and in my attic that I need to either start getting rid of or finding a place to put them, because at this point I don't remember what all I have out there. There is a fine line. I think there is a fine line between collecting and hoarding. That's a subject for a whole different video, but I try to keep my collection relevant to me and what I'm into. And if it starts to feel like it's something that I don't want or need, I have no issues getting rid of it. And so that's how I help keep myself on target and focused. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and how I got into collecting, and thank you for watching. I plan to do a lot more of these videos about specific topics related to collecting. I don't know, I might throw some other types of video topics in there as well. Just depends on what I'm into. I'm a man of many different hobbies and interests, so it's hard for me to narrow down the focus on what I want to talk about, but I think I'm just going to keep it really focused on collecting, and I'll just sprinkle in some other types of videos here and there as I go. Yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.